Welcome to the Michael Welch Podcast. Let's cover Week 10, a couple of the big upsets, and a shakeup in the playoff race. I got my new top 20. We'll go 20 teams, and we'll put together your Week 11 watch guide. Let's go.
All my blessings, 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 all my blessings.
I need my blessings every penny. Daily counting every single one. I'm seeing plenty. Level up and watch that beat turn into a...
Let's start with the big one. Of course, Georgia rolls up on Tennessee 27-13. It was 24-6 at half, and you knew then it was pretty much over, as it was a 3-possession game. Georgia was getting whatever they wanted. They had an opportunity to put another touchdown on the board before the half. Perhaps they, I don't want to say mismanaged the time, but could have allowed themselves more time to take more shots at the end zone. They settled for a field goal, but it could have been potentially 28-6 at half. And Tennessee, man, I don't know why they didn't take more shots in the first half. We certainly had some weird plays going on. They were gifted a field goal to start the game after a fumble by Georgia, who had the opening possession. They also got stuck on their 1-yard line at one point and had to operate out of that, but they had a fumble, and that should have been a safety. They were given the opportunity to then punt it out, and just some weird circumstances in the first half altogether. And some of it went Tennessee's way, some of it went Georgia's way, and in the end, Georgia just came out way ahead. And I think they took a lot of shots that Tennessee was afraid to take. The Vols finished with, I believe it was 5 plays of 20-plus yards, and most of those came when the game was already in hand. They just did not take shots downfield, which was their game. I believe they're still top 5 to 8 in the nation in plays of 30, 40, 50, 60-plus yards down the field. So I don't know why they didn't even take shots that far down. There were certainly instances where there were players open, and you got to take some shots. Of course, there was one where Hendon Hooker threw one, and the corner ended up kind of getting a spot on his receiver. I believe that was a Hyatt pass down towards the end zone, and that was an interception before the end of the second quarter, which was tough. But those are the kind of shots exactly what the Vols needed to take, and they just didn't take them earlier, and Georgia did. Now, it seemed, of course, the home environment was a problem. 7 to 8 false starts or formation penalties on Tennessee, as we're seeing, thin margins in these very close games between very good teams. Sometimes the home environment can be certainly a problem. But overall, the yardage associated in the penalties outside of those procedural penalties weren't terrible. We didn't see like a ton of pass interference or holding or anything like that would be really severe, but you can't be behind the sticks, especially when you're not taking shots. Now, Georgia at times would go 5 wide in the offensive formation. They'd bring in 2 tight ends and go with kind of a jumbo package. They'd still have trouble running the ball at times, but they'd take shots here and there over the top and certainly get some movement there, especially with their big tight end Bowers there. That's who they targeted. That's who they were able to get open. And you could certainly get it on Tennessee. And Tennessee wasn't getting any pressure with their normal 4. They often brought a blitzer, bring a 5th to try and disrupt Stetson Bennett back there. But this was just a rough go for the Vols defense. And early in the game, Georgia was dropping passes, of course, the fumble and the opener. But they just couldn't, get anything going there. And man, it just seemed like poor play calling on the offensive side to try and open things up. And Hooker just looked tentative after a while. So at the second half, once we got to the second half, it was a completely different game. It started to rain. It was a 3-score game, and you're pretty much only going to get 5, maybe 6 possessions in the second half, and you're down 3 scores. So, Georgia, who couldn't really run, knew they could kind of control the clock a bit, even with some of those shorter passes. And the Vols knew that they would be facing extra pressure, and Georgia could bring it because they had to wait. Hendon had to wait for the longer routes to develop down the field. So that was going to be a problem as it was. And he took, I think, 6 sacks total. I think 5, at least 4, maybe 5 of them came in the second half. I think 2 came right on the opening drive because they received the kick to open the second half. So it just made it really easy for Georgia to open up in the second half, to be up 3 possessions in the rain and knowing exactly kind of how to game plan from there. Hendon Hooker finished 23 for 33 for 195 yards and a pick. You have to say he's out of the Heisman conversation for the moment. You really have to be bright in these big games, and you really can't afford stinkers either, and that's kind of what this was. Stetson Bennett was 17 for 25 for 257 and 2 touchdowns. They both teams ended up with a couple turnovers, not the quarterbacks, other than Hooker's one, but this is, a performance that made Georgia look excellent again. The Oregon win's looking better. So you see they're kind of just sleeping through the weaker opponents in the middle of the schedule there up to this point, the past month and a half. But they look great again. They should be the number 1 team again when the new playoff poll comes out on Tuesday. And Tennessee won't drop too far. When you're ranked number 1 and you go on the road and you lose to the new potential number 1, you're just not going to drop that far. And you still have more wins over quality teams than pretty much any other of the teams that are going to be in the top 20 anyways. So you're just not going to fall that far down the polls. You're just not. So, tough loss there. Hooker probably out of the Heisman race, though. And Tennessee can still make the playoffs, especially with the Alabama loss. Tennessee in the same division as Georgia, so if Georgia goes to the SEC championship game, and whether they win or lose there, Tennessee finishing the regular season 11-1 can still make the playoffs. There's certainly a case for that. So let's head to that Alabama game. LSU won 32-31 in overtime. Tigers went for 2 in overtime and got it to win the game. Now, the Tide had 12 men on this final play. They sent a guy off last minute, 2 guys. 2 guys on, 1 guy off last minute. So they had a man scrambling to get off the field. They didn't have a timeout because they went first in overtime. They used a timeout, scored on offense on the defensive end. They gave up the touchdown, though, when LSU decided to go for 2 and they had too many men on the field. They didn't have a timeout to use. So I don't know how you can't say that LSU's play didn't have at least a 90% success rate when the defense doesn't know what the hell it's doing. The linebacker that came over to kind of shove the true freshman receiver there that scored the game-winning 2-pointer was out of position and kind of communicating he wasn't sure what was going on. So pretty much anything LSU kind of ran over into that corner that was his responsibility seems like it would have been successful. So, great game. Great job by LSU. And Alabama continues to be the Bryce Young show and the Jahmyr Gibbs show at running back there. But LSU, man, again, for us who've watched LSU at this point, they have more skill position players right now than Alabama does, and that matters right now. Alabama does not have the players on defense that it has in years past, and LSU does not have the defense that it has in years past with the transfers going in and out and the rebuild that Brian Kelly is doing here. And the offense, the skill positions on the outside, the receivers were going to be the difference in this game, and LSU's were better. Now, in saying that, Alabama, even with 2 losses, can't drop too far, right? This is twofold. They have 2 tough losses to really good teams on the road, Tennessee and LSU, who are both going to be presumably top at least 8 teams. So you're losing to 2 top 8 teams on the road. Very close games, a walk-off field goal and a 2-point conversion in overtime. So you can't drop that far. But also now, you only have 6 wins. So when you lose to all the good teams, you don't have that many wins over good teams either. So that's the other side of that coin there. So talking about Alabama, their best win right now, grabbing the schedule here, and they've got Ole Miss coming off a bye next week on the road, so that'll be a tough game. But Alabama's best win at the moment is probably that Texas which is starting to look better because other than that, they have Texas A&M, who's probably not making a bowl game, Arkansas, who was struggling here, and Mississippi State. So that is a tough look for Alabama right now. So by the same token, you say we lose to good teams real close in coin flip games. You can also point and say, well, also because of that, at this point, you also haven't really beat any quality opponents. So that kind of sucks. But this game was a low-scoring affair. It was 7-6 at the half. So you were holding on throughout this whole thing. This was one of the best games of the day, with that Georgia-Tennessee game in the afternoon being a little bit of a disappointment. So this was certainly a barn burner here. Jalen Daniels was 22 for 32 for only 182 yards and 2 touchdowns. He did have 92 yards and a touchdown on the ground as well. Boudet had 7 catches for 51 yards. Neighbors had 6 for 51, but they made the plays when it mattered. Bryce Young put the ball in the air 51 times, 25 for 51, 328 yards, a touchdown, and a pick. And again, he's under pressure all the time, scrambling in the backfield after his protection has broken down. Jahmyr Gibbs had 15 carries for 99 yards. He also had 8 receptions, led in receptions for the team, 64 yards there. Now, Ja'Cory Brooks did a good job, 7 catches for 97 yards and a touchdown there for that young man. So, but 51 times the ball was in the air for the Crimson Tide. 9 penalties for 92 yards. They had almost 100 yards more offense than LSU did, but just not able to execute to finish this game off here. And man, 7-2. The first time, I believe the statistic ESPN posted was the first time they had 2 losses before the Iron Bowl since 2010. The Iron Bowl rivalry game against Auburn always played the last game of the year, so it's a little of an odd statistic. But the point is that they've lost the Iron Bowl to the eventual team that went to the Florida State National Championship game in 2013, I believe, just before they had the first playoff game, to my recollection. And so that's one. So the point is they've only had 2 regular season losses 2 or 3 times in the past 13 years at this point. So just wild to think about. And it's possible, again, that they lose more with Ole Miss. Again, a team I'm not supremely optimistic on the road next week, but a team that could certainly exploit them with their ability to run the ball for 300-plus yards at times. Austin Peay and Auburn are the last 2 games at home on the slate. But just a tough go there. LSU now, 5-1 in the SEC West. Ole Miss is 4-1. So they would need to win against Alabama next week to kind of stay even there with LSU. Oh, LSU thumped them earlier in the season. So LSU really has the inside track here to go to the SEC championship game, which is crazy, all things considered, what Brian Kelly, the scrutiny he went there, has gone through in heading over there. So it's shaping up to be a Georgia LSU SEC championship game in that particular case, with an outside track for Tennessee to still have a shot at the playoffs. But we'll get to the team still in the hunt in just a second here. Clemson beating Notre Dame was the other massive upset, 35-14. Clemson didn't score until the 4th quarter. Just a bludgeoning. Notre Dame blocked a punt. They had a pick 6 against Syracuse to open the game last week, so something to be said for the non-offensive touchdowns and non-offensive play to put them in a position to score touchdowns, because the offense has been horrific. Payne, the quarterback for Notre Dame again, 9 for 17 for 85 yards and a touchdown. It's ridiculously horrid. Running the football, Diggs had 17 carries for 114 at, 6.7 a pop. Estamine had 18 carries for 104 and a touchdown. That's 5.8 per pop. But you know what they're doing there. And Clemson in particular, they did have another defensive end out for this game as they've had defensive injuries. They haven't had a complete unit the entire season, but still, that's not the problem here. The problem is on the offensive side of the ball. DJ Ungale, less than 5 yards per pass attempt. Put the ball in the air 39 times, 191 yards, touchdown, a pick. Klubenik, I was talking to a friend of mine I was watching games with in the first half. I said, well, are we going to see Cade Klubenik come in, despite the fact that he really didn't seem to make a difference last time he was on the football field? And then he's going to struggle, and we'll see DJ come back in. What's that going to do to the team? And lo and behold, Klubenik came in just long enough to throw a pick himself, and then DJ did indeed come back into the football game. So, 2 turnovers and a pick between the two quarterbacks. Shipley had 12 carries for 63 yards and a touchdown, 5.3 yards per carry. I still don't know why they don't hand him off the ball more. I still think he's one of the better, a lot of good running backs in college football, but I don't know why they don't hand him the ball more. He could still be one of the great running backs in college football, and this was just a slugfest for a very long time. It was 14-0 at the half. There were no points in the third quarter. I don't know why you can't just hand Shipley the football, find the way to get him the ball in space. He had 5 catches for 17 yards, but it's just mind-boggling why he isn't more involved like Jahmyr Gibbs does for Alabama, like a lot of other teams do with their running backs. So, the Irish, not doing anything particularly special here. The defense, it seems like a legitimate unit. It's kept them in a lot of games. But Clemson, I don't know what you do with this. This was shocking. We know they've had some problems. Some problems. We know the offense has been bad for 2 years now. And Klubenik was supposed to be the savior. And he hasn't shown anything yet. True freshman. Only a few passes. A couple quarters here and there. There's a couple receivers. Davis Allen at 7 grabs. Antonio Williams. Adam Randall. They got some guys. But man, this football team, this is just not good. It doesn't seem like good coaching. The staff seems to not know how to adjust. This is really bad for Clemson. And their resume isn't going to be strong enough to put them in the playoffs. It's just not. Now they have a 3-game homestand to finish the season out. Louisville, Miami, South Carolina. Of those teams, only South Carolina is guaranteed a bowl game. I take that back. Louisville, surprisingly, bowl eligible now as well. They could lose another game. It was easy to say at one point that they'd run through these teams, but now Louisville's got a little fight. South Carolina, it's got this weird special team scoring type thing going on of their own accord. So Clemson is just not a powerhouse right now. They're a powerhouse in recruiting, but they seem to have a little bit of a Jim Fisher type deal going on. They're getting in the recruits. The quarterback position seems to be a problem, and if you don't have that figured out, it's a real difficulty. But besides that, you should be able to win football games with talent on the defensive line, talent on just the offensive line, and a good running back getting some push, even if the quarterback position's struggling a bit against a team like Notre Dame, which has struggled throughout the entire season. I mean, hell, Marshall figured it out. Stanford figured it out. Very bad look for Clemson. And I don't know how they're going to recover. They're still 6-0 in conference play, though. So don't worry. You'll get to see them play the high-powered North Carolina offense in the ACC championship game. The Tar Heels now have a 2-game lead in the Coastal Division. I think that's the Coastal Division. So they will be in a collision course to play each other there. Now, North Carolina themselves had to survive a late push by Virginia, but they did manage to pull that ball game out. I didn't get a good look at that one. That was one of the few games I did not get an opportunity to see there. But Virginia had an early lead, North Carolina came back, I believe had a double-digit lead for a period, and Virginia came back late. 31-28 was the final there. Drake May was 26 for 37, 293 yards, 2 touchdowns. Ironically enough, it's one of the better stat lines for guys with potential Heisman hopes on the day, with Bryce Young not faring so well. C.J. Stroud, we'll get to in a second, not faring so well in a windy game. Blake Corum ended up looking a little pedestrian against Rutgers. Josh Downs for North Carolina had 15 receptions for 166 yards and a touchdown. We knew that was going to be the number one target heading into the year. He's been all season, but that was a wild stat line to be on the receiving end of 15 of the 27 completions for Drake May. May also had 74 rushing yards and a touchdown as he continues to lead that team in rushing yards as well. The Michigan 52-17 score is going to look good on the box score. Michigan outscored Rutgers 38-0 in the second half, though. They trailed 17-14 at halftime, sleeping through another first half. I just don't understand what goes on in the mental state to do this. Wimslot, the Rutgers quarterback, had 3 picks to finish the game. They finished with less than 200 yards of total offense. They had a special teams touchdown, I believe, in the first half. I missed that particular piece of the game. Got it in time for the comeback there. J.J. McCarthy was 13 for 27, 151 yards and 2 touchdowns. Again, at what point are you looking at him? Even though he's had an impressive completion percentage, he's had some good runs, he has a couple good throws. At what point are you looking at him and saying, yes, he's going to raise the ceiling on a team that has a national championship hopes? And you can say that about Michigan. But it's terrifying when you say, we like the defensive ends now. We like the couple receivers we have. We have a Heisman potentially winning running back here in Corum, who had 109 yards and 2 touchdowns, 20 carries, and that was a bad day. Edwards had 15 carries for 109 as well. And he just isn't producing when he needs to. I just don't like it. Don't like it at all. But Michigan ends up running away with it late, much like Ohio State had to do against Penn State last week. And speaking of Ohio State, they won 21-7 in a game that they trailed for a good chunk of time at Northwestern, the only team that still hasn't won in the United States this year. A team that's ranked somewhere between, by my estimates, like 120 to 125th in the country. And I realize it was a road game. A lot of these games had weather, really windy. But my God, it was horrible. Horrible. They had some skill position players out, but we know they have lots of depth there, and there's just absolutely no freaking reason you shouldn't still win this game by at least 3 to 5 scores. Just ridiculous. C.J. Stroud was 10 for 26 for 76 yards. He had 79 yards on 6 carries as well, but he broke this nice long 40-plus yarder to account for a lot of that. Mayan Williams, the freshman running back there, had 26 carries for 111 yards and 2 touchdowns with Trevion out at running back. But again, they have a fleet of guys there. It doesn't really matter who's running the football. Harrison Jr. had 5 catches for 51 yards. Igba had 2 for 6. And again, it was a windy day. But my God, you can't have this horrid performance against Northwestern. This is bad. This will drop them in the playoff rankings. Speaking of drops, Illinois lost 23-15 to Michigan State. Now they still have control of the Big Ten West due to the lead that they have accumulated there over the other teams that can't do anything on the offensive side of the ball. But it was gross. They couldn't score on a defense that suspended 8 players. They were driving late, down 8 to score. They really kind of mismanaged the time. They were in the red zone, or they were on the See, they're on the 25 at one point. I believe they got inside that again. And just bad play. And the clock ran out on them before they could have had another one or two throws at the end zone. Just horrible mismanagement. And to get to that point, they already had a touchdown and a 2-point conversion in the fourth quarter just to pull that close. So it was at one point 23-7. Yeah, 23-7 going into the fourth. What in the hell? For an Illinois team that's looked pretty good all season. The Indiana loss earlier, first month of the season looked pretty bad, but yeah, when you have 2 losses to Indiana and Michigan State, and this was at Illinois, that's bad. That is so bad. They got Michigan still on the slate. Mel Tucker now has 4 top 25 wins in 4 seasons on the road, which I believe is the most in the country, which is kind of wild to think about. 4 road top 25 wins over the past 4 seasons. That's what the number is. ESPN stat. Indiana lost 2 quarterbacks. They're down to their third in a 45-14 loss to Penn State. That's one game that went according to plan. I didn't actually watch 1 second of that game, I will admit. I did watch pieces of all 3 of these. Nebraska losing 20-13 to Minnesota, and the Gophers were down 10-0 at half to the freaking Huskers with a backup quarterback. Mo Ibrahim eventually helped the Gophers put the game away there. Tanner Morgan did play. He was 6 for 8 for 35 yards. The backup, whose name I can't pronounce, Kalakamanis, ended up going in 6 for 12 for 137. Just, oh God, the offense here is horrible. Mo Ibrahim had 128 yards and 2 touchdowns on 32 carries. That was the offense. He counted for 128 out of 300 of Minnesota's yards. He gets all the touches. He is the team that is now 6-3. While Nebraska falls to 3-6, they're not out of bowl eligibility yet. They don't have a quarterback. Casey Thompson was out. They play 2 different guys, win a combined 11 for 26. No throwing touchdowns. Just horrific game there, as we talked about in the preview. Maryland and Wisconsin, that was a bit of a shocker, kind of. No Tulia Togoloa at quarterback, so I guess not too big of a shocker. It was in the way that it went. No points scored by Maryland in the first, so they were down 17-0 in the second. And Wisconsin proceeded to just kick a couple field goals and lock it up 23-10. Nothing super spectacular there. We know Maryland's defense has been better, but Tulia and that offense are still important to stay ahead, and no Tulia that's struggled. They managed to win a couple games without him, but not on the road in Madison. And finally, Iowa beating Purdue 24-3. O'Connell for Purdue 20 for 40 for 168 and 2 touchdowns. He has to throw the football for them to win. Again, that's all these teams have limitations. Iowa has no offense. I believe they scored 2 defensive touchdowns in this game. Purdue can't run the ball as effectively. The defense is questionable. O'Connell can have bad games. Maryland is dependent very much on their quarterback. And we praise the defense because it's now pedestrian and not a wet paper bag. Wisconsin can't throw the ball, and the defense isn't as threatening all the way around. Minnesota doesn't have as much as an offense this year, and the defense is questionable at times. Illinois doesn't have too much of an offense, although they have a couple playmakers, and the defense is locked down. I believe the Big Ten still has, heading into the week, they had 4 of the top 5 total defenses in the country in terms of yards allowed. The only one with a real chance at a New Year's Six Bowl or a championship was Michigan. So some real limitations, particularly in this West Division, in which the Illinois Fighting Illini still currently lead. A lot of these teams have winning records, by the way, probably in bowl games. Wisconsin's 5-4, Maryland's 6-3, Purdue's 5-4, Iowa's 5-4, Minnesota's 6-3, and none of them are fun to watch. Let's talk good football. Big 12. TCU, Texas Tech was the big game in the noon slot, and it was good. It was good for 3 quarters. Texas Tech, were they up? No, they trailed at half. It was 13-10 TCU at the half. Texas Tech was doing everything it needed to stay in this ball game. They created a lot of pressure on Max Duggan. They did a good job stopping them in the red zone. I believe they stopped them twice on 4th down in the red zone, off the top of my head. Now, Johnston, the top receiver for TCU, went out in the first quarter. He might have went out in the first couple plays. So that was a problem. Top receiving threat out. He's the, I want to say, Kelvin Johnson equivalent. If he's out, then it's going to take some time for them to kind of solve and see who's the go-to receiving guy and focal point of the offense going forward. And it took them some time. 7 points in the first quarter, a couple field goals in the second, 21 points in the fourth quarter for TCU to pull it out and win by 10. Now, Texas Tech, again, interchangeable quarterbacks. The true freshman started, and then he was banged up and left the game. Morton, 7 for 10, 79 yards and a touchdown. Soat came in, the former Oregon transfer. Again, he's banged up, hurt in the first game, came back last week, played for a couple snaps, came back in relief here. 9 for 22 for 78 yards, touchdown and a pick. So 50% completion rate between the quarterbacks combined for 157 yards. Not great there for Texas Tech, and they needed some production there to stay in the football game. Just under 200 yards on the ground, but that isn't the focal point of what they're doing. Max Duggan ended up 12 for 23 for 195 and 2 touchdowns. Miller looked good, 21 carries for 158 yards and a touchdown, 7.5 yards per carry. He had a nice 50-yarder and had a nice couple plays for him. The offense for both teams really just kind of petered out. I mean, Texas Tech managed to pull it out. They had a couple of guys with 3 catches each, but without Johnston, I'm not sure if he's going to be out moving forward, but this team's going to struggle. And the defense was okay for Texas Tech, TCU, and we know that's been a problem. And they were able to limit Texas Tech, but the quarterbacks just aren't very good there. They're kind of interchangeable. I actually would have went with Donovan Smith, door number 3 there for the Red Raiders. That being said, I think TCU, for the time being, based on their ceiling and potential and what they've accomplished so far, should be up higher in the playoff rankings than they have been so far. They've been disrespected down at number, is this 7 right now? I have the AP and playoff rankings flip-flopped around here. They're down a few spots too low. They should be ranked a little bit higher. And should they lose at Texas next week or Baylor, then you drop them. Now, 2 teams who will for sure be dropping are Oklahoma State and Kansas State. Let's start with the Cowboys. Oklahoma State lost 37-16 at Kansas. Jalen Daniels did not return for the Jayhawks, and they effectively ended any postseason hopes for Oklahoma State, any big hopes. Both teams are now 6-3. Backup Garrett Rangel went 27 for 40 for 304 yards, 2 touchdowns, 3 picks for the Cowboys. Spencer Sanders was out. I didn't even double check his status before I hopped on recording here. He's struggled with a shoulder injury for multiple weeks. That team's been banged up. Not shocking that he was out for this game. And Oklahoma State is just been floundering here. And they didn't score for a bit. I think Kansas went up, 3 touchdowns early? 10-0 early. It was 24-7 at the half. And I kind of started flipping around to other games heading into the second half there. Kansas was the better football team. Again, their offense has not been the problem. Jalen Daniels coming back would continue to kind of elevate the ceiling and what they're able to do there. for Kansas, and the defense has still been an issue, but Oklahoma State was just not good. They weren't good at all. 6-3 now. They've lost 3 straight. And it can still get worse. It can still get worse. They've lost 3 of 4. They lost at Texas, at TCU, at Kansas State, at Kansas. They beat Texas in there. Let's not forget that. They have Iowa State at home, at Oklahoma, home against West Virginia. 3 winnable games, but the Big 12 is still competitive. All these teams can still beat them. It's hard to evaluate where they're going to be moving forward. Gundy's certainly not going to punt on the season. Great head coach there. One of the longest tenured coaches in the country at the moment, actually. But just a tough go there. Neal, it's worth noting, Devin Neal, the Kansas running back, 224 yards on the ground on 32 carries. Had a touchdown. 6 receptions as well for 110 yards. Crazy, crazy numbers. One of the players of the week, certainly in college football. And Kansas carried off the goalpost at the end here. Tossed it in the river. The social media account for the Jayhawks mockingly posted afterwards a picture of the new goalpost they'd put up in its place and just said no GoFundMe was needed as kind of a tongue-in-cheek to Tennessee when they pulled the goalpost out in the Alabama game and tossed that one in the river. And the fans started a GoFundMe for a new goalpost there. So, kind of funny. Jayhawks are bowl eligible for the first time since 2008. Since the Fighting Manginis, as a friend of mine said. I believe they made was it a New Year's Six bowl game that year? That was the last time they not only had some success, but great success. So it was a good job there by the Jayhawks. Hopefully Jane Daniels does make it back and we get to see him some more. He was, of course, a great story for the first couple months of this season. The Cowboys, though, I'm not sure what they do. They did have 0 penalties against Texas their last time out, or a couple weeks back. They had 1 penalty today, so at least they're not highly penalized. Hopefully they'll get healthier. Hopefully Spencer Sanders will get back. They did have 4 turnovers today. Part of that is this breaking in the newer quarterback here. So I assume that they'll be back and they'll be healthy and they'll be ready to go these last 3 weeks because they can still potentially win them out. So the ceiling is still a 9-3 season and a nicer bowl game. That is still there and a good opponent possibly heading into the Christmas time season. So it's not all dumpster fire, but just a tough month here to just put the playoff hopes and Big 12 conference hopes up in flames. Tough way for it to go. Texas beat Kansas State 34-27. Kansas State was actually driving to tie this game up, and Adrian Martinez did Adrian Martinez things, fumbled it on the drive. Texas recovered, and that was it. He had to throw a hell of a lot in this game. Let's flip in between this and our night games here. LSU and Alabama, and oh boy, what else? I was watching all kinds of things. Mississippi State, Auburn, and Michigan, Rutgers, Clemson, Notre Dame. So, but this one, man, all I saw was Martinez throwing a whole lot, and I was like, man, that's always recipe for a loss. He was 24 for 36. If you cut those passes in half, you're still throwing it too much. 36 pass attempts, 329 yards, 2 touchdowns, a pick, and the losing fumble. 14 carries for 52 yards and a touchdown. Will Howard, of course, looked really good last week throwing the football, running a little bit. And a couple weeks before, or the week before that, when Martinez originally was banged up, would have been nice to see him in the football game. But still, Kansas State was right in the thick of this. Deuce Vaughn was making some big plays for them. He had 19 carries for 73 yards, but he also was making some big catches, 7 of them for 86 yards and a touchdown. He led the team in receptions. He was second in yards, and he's the only one or two guys with a receiving touchdown. Just a big, big deal there, and it's still turning into whoever's a quarterback and him as the two main playmakers there. The defense still is good. Ewers, man, on the other side for Texas, 18 for 31 for 197 yards, 6.4 yards per pass. That's not great when you have guys downfield. Really good receivers. Xavier Worthy, who had 2 touchdowns but only 4 receptions for 42 yards. Travion Sanders had 5 catches for 54 yards. Ewers threw 2 touchdowns. He just is still not looking particularly impressive to me. Bijan Robinson had 30 carries in this game for 209 yards and a touchdown. That's 7 yards per pop. He also had 2 grabs for 34 yards, 17 yards average. Obviously, one of them went for 21, though. I mean, he's the guy right now, and he should have been the guy last year, this year. Roshan Johnson, the reserve running back, technically, who will be the starter next year. 7 carries for 62 yards, almost 9 yards per carry and a touchdown. That's where it's at. Quentin Ewers is still young. He's still developing, man. He's not Caleb Williams. Caleb Williams came on last year as a true freshman for Oklahoma. Now at USC, obviously. And he's just not that. He's just not that right now. But Texas, another big win. You'll hear all about them on the national media this week. They're 6-3, 4-2 in conference play. Still not out of the Big Ten conference race. Let me get the standings right up here. TCU's obviously got a 2-game lead on everyone. And after that, there's Texas. How about that? Texas is tied with Baylor and Kansas State at 4-2, but obviously Kansas State win gives them the tiebreaker lead, and they will play Baylor in a couple weeks. So their games left are home against TCU, at Kansas, home against Baylor. So they are very much in the race for the Big 12. They're probably, can't believe I'm saying this, the best looking team in the Big 12, but it's just not because of the quarterback position right now. God, that's wild, isn't it? TCU, 9-0, 6-0 in conference play. Texas is 6-3, 4-2 in conference play. Baylor and Kansas State are both 6-3, 4-2 in conference play. Baylor's starting to look a little bit better. They had a nice win over Oklahoma, a nice big win. Of course, I talked about that, how that'd be a little bit under the radar game. They ended up pulling that one out 38-35 in a wild one, a wild game that was back and forth all the way through. It was 14-14. It was 24-17 at half. Then it was a touchdown each in the third, a touchdown each in the fourth, just a back and forth and a back and forth. Just a wild football game there. And Baylor's now right back in the Big 12 race as well, with Kansas State trending down, Oklahoma State trending down, Oklahoma, of course, down there towards the bottom. Just a little crazy there in that conference. To wrap up the ACC, Florida State had no problems with Miami, 45-3. 45-3, no problems there in that rivalry game. Florida State's now 6-3. They're only 4-3 in the ACC, though. They're out of that conference race. Pittsburgh looked a little bit more alive. They beat Syracuse 19-9. The Qs are now on a 3-game slide. Carlos Del Rio Wilson was in for his first start, the redshirt freshman, in place of Garrett Schrader for Syracuse because he was out hurt. He was hit 6 times. He completed 8 passes, and that's about sums up the game right there. The team had less than 200 yards of total offense. Pittsburgh came to play finally. That defensive front that they're known for kind of showed up for one of the few times all season. Slovic, again, wasn't great. 16 for 23, 176, and a touchdown. And they were without their top rusher as well. Their top guy there. But Hammond had 28 carries for 124 and a touchdown. So just injuries all over for two teams that really weren't that great anyways. And Pittsburgh pulls what's technically an upset. They're now 5-4. The Qs are 6-3. The other game between two ranked teams that no one realized was happening, number 22 and 21, NC State and Wake Forest. NC State moved to 7-2. And the young quarterback for NC State, Mr. M.J. Morris, kind of outplayed Sam Hartman for Wake Forest. Hartman was 29 for 48 for 397 yards, just boatloads of passes, tons, almost 400 yards, 2 touchdowns, 3 interceptions, and they were playing from behind for the entire game. But Morris was 18 for 28, 210, 3 touchdowns. He was at 43 yards on the ground on 18 scrambles. It wasn't very efficient or impressive on that particular end. But they had a lead. They put a lead up, they got ahead, and they beat up on Wake Forest, which is on a 2-game skid of their own now. And just a good job. NC State was outgained. NC State forced 3 turnovers. They won with that defense and efficient quarterback playing, which Leary wasn't looking good anyways this season. Expected to be one of the top quarterbacks heading into this year. And of course, now that his shoulder's out, we get the new kid in here, and this could be another pretty good team next year. They're going to lose some of these linebackers, some of the pieces here. NC State still has potential to win 10 games, which is a rarity there. They've got Boston College next, at Louisville, at North Carolina, so it's not going to be easy, but it's going to be a setup for some interesting games down the line here. I think the last few games that I want to touch on here, the windy game that happened Friday night, Washington managed to knock off Oregon State 24-21. The Beavers held a nice lead there until the fourth quarter. This was weird. The ball was sailing a bit. Michael Penix did a pretty good job most of the time of getting the ball where it needed to go. It's so weird to see him on such a successful team. He put the ball in the air 52 times, so he didn't care that it was windy and raining at times like it was. They also lost power briefly in the third quarter, I believe it was, fourth quarter maybe. And the game was delayed, and then they had to get everything going again and get it back on and get all the guys stretching back on the field and ready to go again. And it was Washington that came out and was the only team to score after that. So they managed to put 10 points up on the board there and pull it out. Michael Penix, 298, touchdown and a pick off of all those passing attempts. And Ben Gulbranson for the Beavers, 12 for 19 for 87 yards as they put the ball on the ground there in Martinez's hands, who had 107 yards on 19 attempts. So it was a very slow and plodding game. 4.6 yards per pass for Oregon, 5.7 for Washington, 4.4 and 4.2 yards per carry. Only 1 turnover each, 18 penalties combined. So just a very slow-moving game, but it was close all the way through. And it's Washington that moves to 7-2. Well, the Beavers are 6-3, but we still got a couple of interesting teams here in the Pac-12. The late-night games on Saturday ended up closer than you would think. UCLA put up tons of points, 14 in the first, 14 in the second, 14 in the third. They scored 8 in the fourth quarter to make it a 2-score margin, because Arizona State managed to put up some odd increments of numbers here. 15 in the third, 11 in the fourth, but they managed to just move the football in the second half. They were down 28-10 in the first, or at halftime after the first half, and they managed to kind of stay in the football game here. Bourget, the quarterback for the Sun Devils, put the ball in the air 49 times. Well, he completed 38 passes and managed to keep them moving, 7.1 yards per attempt. And it just seemed like they'd never really be in it. And then he just kind of peaked up in the second half, and they were back in it again. So they're still feisty. They may grab another win yet this year. The rest of their schedule here, at Washington State, home against Oregon State, at Arizona. So it's just interesting that they're still in these ball games. Dorian Thomas-Robinson, 13 for 20 passing for 196, 2 touchdowns and a pick, 120 yards and 2 touchdowns on the ground. They did not have their star running back there, Zach Charbonnet, who was technically active, but just on the sidelines. He had some stuff on his arms and his calf, so maybe he was like injured, but it might have also just been one of these weird healthy scratch things where they're kind of resting players, really. So kind of looked like that a little bit. So UCLA managed to squeak one out here. On the other hand, USC really struggled a bit here. They were winning pretty big. I mean, it was 20-7 at the half. You thought they were going to put it away in the fourth quarter, but they were outscored 20-7. They ultimately won by 6 points. Now, Travis Adai was back at running back, 15 carries for 98 yards and a touchdown. Michael Jackson showed up at the receiving position. He had 5 catches for 115 yards and 2 touchdowns. Taj Washington had 7 for 112 and a touch. Terrell Bynum had 7 for 68, but they still had a couple guys out at the receiving position, a couple of their top guys, including Jordan Addison. But Cal had a nice sequence where they scored a touchdown, got an onside kick, scored another touchdown, and they scored one on the next possession. So they just kind of got ahead there. And USC's defense is not going to win them any national championships. And it's keeping teams like these Golden Bears in the game, and Arizona. So just a tough showing there. Caleb Williams is dragging this team, though, this offense. 4 touchdowns again, 360 yards on the dot, 26 for 41 passing. I mean, Travis Adai is still fantastic there at running back. But still, Williams, 38 yards on the ground as well for a touchdown, rushing as well. And he's just phenomenal to watch. But this team is not winning a national championship with a defense like this. The last game I wanted to touch on was in the night window, the night slate in the American. It was SMU 77-63 win over Houston. I flipped this on just before half. I think it was 49-30 something. And I was like, oh my God, it's not even halftime yet. We have like 9 or 10 touchdowns on the board. Ended up being, 120 points, I think. 130 points. It's a record for points at the FBS level, which I didn't even realize at the time. But 77-63. Both teams are now 5-4 and 3-2 in American Conference play. So they're still in the mix there a little bit, but just no defense. This was quite a game to flip through as Alabama was finishing up and Clemson and all in those games. But Tune for Houston, 36 for 53, 527 yards, 7 touchdowns, 3 picks, and that's what ended up costing them this football game. Tanner Morcadell, 28 for 37 for 379 and 9 touchdowns on the other end for SMU. We had teams going for it on 4th down. 3 for 4 for Houston, 3 for 3 for SMU. Ironically enough, Houston, 1 for 5 on 3rd down and 3 for 4 on 4th down. They just never faced 4th down. But it was the 3-0 turnover margin for Houston that ended up costing them this game. And I was just hoping for overtime and more points as we got towards the end there. But it was over 1,352 yards of total offense. It's not strange in high-scoring games to see like 1,100 yards, but when you start to get close to 1,200 and higher than that, you're like, now I'm really watching something. So this is wild to see this game continue to go on. But that's pretty much the main recap. I'll get some more games in the mix here as we head through the watch guide for the week. I wanted to put together like a top 20 real quick here. The AP poll hasn't yet dropped on Sunday. The playoff rankings will be out until Tuesday. So I have Georgia number 1. That's no surprise. Wins over Oregon and Tennessee. Now, those are basically home games. Tennessee was home. Oregon was basically home in Georgia there. They have 2 road games coming up here that are going to be not necessarily challenges, but they haven't been challenged on the road yet, is my point. So they play Mississippi State and Kentucky to finish. So we'll see if there's dominant there. But it could be different once they get to the SEC championship game, maybe the playoffs. Just something to keep in mind there. They're looking good offensively. Stetson Bennett still isn't a superstar per se. I'm still concerned about some of their wide receivers. And so they're just not clearing ahead, far ahead of everyone else, but we already know that. There's no one standout team this year. Michigan, I have number 2. They have the big win over Penn State at home, and that's really it, but they just look better than Ohio State right now. They have a home game against Illinois coming up, which is kind of soured a little bit, and the big Ohio State game left. Ohio State, I have number 3. They've also beaten Penn State on the road. I guess the Notre Dame game is looking better. But both of these teams, Ohio State now struggling at times against Notre Dame a little bit, and Northwestern here, and there's been a few where they're just slow, but Michigan's had the same problem in the first half of games. Indiana, this game here against Rutgers, so I don't know what it is with these teams. I don't know what the deal is, but they're two of the 4 undefeated teams. I have TCU fourth. I realize that looks crazy now. They have wins over Oklahoma, Oklahoma State, Kansas on the road. All of them have 3 losses or more at this point, with all the Owls going down this past week. But I'm looking down the list and I'm like, all these teams have problems. All of them do. So when you put Max Duggan and Johnston, although he could be out for this upcoming week, who knows how bad his injury is, even though the defense has some problems, they're not a complete dumpster fire. Do I really think that they don't have a chance on a neutral field against anyone? Is that really the case? I don't think it is. So they're undefeated. I'm putting them number 4. Number 5, I have Tennessee. This is the one team I'd probably jump over TCU. 8-1. So they have wins at Pitt, home against Florida, home against Kentucky, at LSU, and all of those teams won this past week. You can say Pitt had an injury when they played that game. That's fine. Florida, Kentucky, I think Will Levis played that game. I believe he did. He's had some injuries. But still, it's more good wins than anyone else in the country. And a couple of them on the road. And they have one of Alabama's losses, too. I counted for one of them. So even though they kind of fell apart at Georgia here, and really in the first half, second half, I have some problems with the first half, kind of play calling and the way they were approaching things. Second half, it seemed like they opened things up, yet it was also when he took Hooker faced more pressure. It seems like they still could have figured some things out in that first half to help him along, and they just kind of blew it. But we know it's hard to win on road in road environments, particularly when the margins are so slim with these very good football teams. Number 6, I have Oregon. And there's a lot of talk about how Bo Nix is doing very well, and he is, and the offense is great, and it is. But the defense, the same with USC and UCLA. But Oregon is 127th in third down defense. Like, everyone's converting on this team. It's like fourth worst in the country. They aren't allowing a ton of red zone trips. But when teams get down there, they are converting touchdowns more times than they're converting field goals or not converting at all. They're outside of the top 50 in that particular category. Top 60, I believe, outside the top 60. And I know Georgia and UCLA account for 2 of those games, but it's not like they're just rolling other people on the defensive end either. So, and they're going to be on upset watch for the next 3 weeks. Despite not having a couple of the top Pac-12 teams on the schedule, they still have some tough teams coming out. So, Oregon, I have 6th. 7th, I have LSU, the highest 2-loss team. So they lost the coin flip game to Florida State to open the season, won the coin flip game against Alabama most recently. In between, they were crushed by Tennessee, and they did the crushing against Ole Miss. They are looking better. They have trouble running the football with an actual running back. It's very much Jaden Daniels or bust. They have great perimeter talent from an offensive perspective. The defense looks like they're getting better. They can get pressure on the front 4. And they're going to be able to get some more wins here and possibly go to the SEC championship game. I have them number 7. Number 8, I have UCLA. Wins over Utah and Washington. Looking good. The loss at Oregon, and that's kind of why I have them this far down. The offense still looks like they have potential to do a lot moving forward, and hopefully that trench warfare there on the offensive defensive lines continues to carry them. I have Alabama 9. I mean, you lose 2 tough road games, a walk-off field goal, and a walk-off 2-point conversion. They still don't look great, but they still have a lot of talent, and they still have the best coaching in the country. Some of the best coaching, I should say. It's questionable. Now they just don't quite look prepared. Prepared is not right. Like they're adjusting properly. Something's not quite right. But number 10 is USC. I put them this far down because they're playing a number of one-possession games. The defense counted on forcing turnovers early and not turning the ball over. And they're still not really turning the ball over in offense. But the defense is giving up a lot of yards. And their best win has got to be at Oregon State. They beat Fresno State with no quarterback. They lost at Utah, although it was on a 2-point conversion. So this last Cal win, this past Saturday, might be the best win, one of the best wins they've had. And Cal might not be going to a bowl game. There's no Oregon or Washington on the schedule, and they haven't played UCLA yet. So it's hard to say with USC. Now, the offense looks great. It'll look even better when everyone's healthy. I think, although there's still only one football to go around, there's still talent at the skill position players. Jordan Addison will help open up the downfield, but the offense isn't the problem. So I'm just not sure how much higher the ceiling goes for this USC team. Number 11 is Clemson, in part because I don't know how many other teams you put higher than them, unfortunately. They did win at Wake Forest and at Florida State. They beat NC State. So those are some kind of wins. All those teams, Florida State's got 3 losses. Wake Forest has got 3 losses. Could get a 4th this week. NC State is 2. I don't know. The ACC is not in the best of shape. Number 12 is Ole Miss. They beat Kentucky. They lost at LSU, and there's a whole lot of crap in between. Not a tough schedule there. Don't really trust the quarterback. Oh, sort of like Clemson. But at least they can run the ball. They got something steady on offense there. I don't know. Ole Miss, almost 12. We'll see how they do against Alabama, I suppose, this week. Number 13, North Carolina. What are the wins here? They won at Appalachian State, at Duke, at Virginia, and 2 of those are still in their home state. Barely winning. They've got a reeling Wake Forest up on the road next. Maybe they can win this week by less than a touchdown. How about that? But Drake May carrying this team. So I've got North Carolina 13. So at 14, I have Utah. They're 7-2. They beat Washington State by 4. They have the 1-point win over USC on a 2-point conversion. They lost by 3 at Florida, 10 at UCLA. The defense seems to be reeling a bit. Again, their top tight end went out for the season earlier in the year, but they've kind of just moved guys up the depth chart there. I don't know. I haven't watched as much of them recently, fuller games, but just not quite the Utah team that was supposed to compete for a playoff spot. Number 15, I have Penn State, 7-2. They lost to Michigan and Ohio State, and they're beating the rest of the Big Ten, which is settling to be a very mediocre conference. Minnesota, Auburn, Purdue. They could finish 10-2, though. 3 games they can win down the stretch. Number 16, I have NC State, 7-2, lost at Clemson, lost at Syracuse. They beat Wake Forest and Texas Tech. Just nothing super impressive here in the ACC to build off of. So maybe they found a quarterback, though. MJ Jordan. Defense is still okay. They're giving up some points recently, though. They have spots on there, a few players. Number 17, I have Tulane, and I actually considered moving them up further. 8-1. They're winning by at least a couple scores in general against their American Conference opponents. They do have a decent defense on the passing defense at least, and they're doing enough to win games right now comfortably. They did win at Kansas State. Let's not forget that. And that's why I put them above number 18, Texas, who's 6-3. And that road win against Kansas State's one of their feathers in their cap right now. And they beat UTSA as well. Now, they lost to Alabama by a point, but, Ewers didn't finish that game. They lost to Texas Tech in double overtime, but no Ewers for that game. They lost to Oklahoma State. But still, Power 5 team, 3 losses. Non-Power 5 team, 1 loss. They have the same best win on the road at Kansas State. I'm putting Tulane above Texas. Liberty, I have at 19. They won at Arkansas this past week. Arkansas was driving for the game-tying touchdown. They went for 2 to win it, and I think it was originally ruled, was it no good? Well, on review, it was revealed that R.J. Jefferson was just short, and they lost the football game, which is crazy because Liberty's only loss of the year was at Wake Forest, where they did not convert a 2-point conversion. Otherwise, this team would be undefeated. They've beaten BYU, UAB, so it's kind of, they're an independent school. They have to just cobble the schedule together. But I have them with one loss. They're 8-1. I have them at 19. And 20, I slipped in Illinois. They're 7-2. They lost to Michigan State, Indiana. That's horrid. And they're beating up on the West, which looks bad right now. But the defense seems legitimate. And the offense needs to keep up their end if they're to compete with, I guess, whoever they play in the Big Ten championship game. Michigan or Ohio State. Both teams who start off a little slow. So Georgia, Michigan, Ohio State, TCU, Tennessee, Oregon, LSU, UCLA, Alabama, USC is my top 10. Clemson, Ole Miss, North Carolina, Utah, Penn State, NC State, Tulane, Texas, Liberty, Illinois rounds out my top 20. Your weekday watches start with MACtion, of course. All the teams are playing Tuesday and Wednesday. So Tuesday, November 8th. At 7 o'clock, you have Eastern Michigan at 5-4 playing at Akron, who's 2-3. I don't currently have a network for that one. Eastern Michigan's been a team that's competing in the MAC conference, certainly though. At 7:30, Ohio is 6-3. They're at Miami of Ohio, who's 4-5 on ESPN2. And at 8 o'clock, Ball State's 5-4, and they're at Toledo, who's 6-3 on ESPN. Now, the top two teams in the MAC right now are Ohio at 6-3 and Toledo at 6-3 as well on the ESPN2 games. So if you want to flip it around and check out and see how those two teams are doing, that's certainly an option there. The top two teams, one in the East and one in the West. The Ohio Bobcats actually have a three-way 4-1 record tie with Buffalo and Bowling Green, but they just beat Buffalo 45-24, smashed them down in the last game, so they'd have the tiebreaker there and officially win the East. If the conference were to end today, they play Bowling Green in a few weeks to end the regular season. Rourke had 317 yards passing last week as probably the top quarterback in the conference, certainly a talented guy there, and 5 touchdowns on 20 of 29 passing. So he'll be out there slinging the ball again. And as for Toledo, I believe they're coming off a bye week. No, they beat Eastern Michigan 27-24, a feisty Eagles team there. And again, this is a team that's relied mostly on the quarterback position, and there was a little switch over there. Tucker Gleason took in the reins there at quarterback and had 3 touchdowns. Looked a little bit steadier in the pocket there. I'm not sure if he'll be back in for Tuesday's game or DeQuain Finn, the previous starter, but still interesting there at quarterback either way, whether they have a more steady throwing hand there or more of a dual threat there at the position. And Eastern Michigan was in the mix. Now that they've taken a couple losses, it's a little bit tougher, but of course they're the other game there in the early slate playing at Akron, so you have a decent team in each of the games there. Now on Wednesday, November 9th, we have 3 7 o'clock games. Northern Illinois at 2-7 is at Western Michigan, who's 3-6 on ESPNU. Buffalo's 5-4 at Central Michigan, who's 3-6 on ESPN2. Kent State's 3-6 at Bowling Green, who's 4-1. I don't have that listed currently, but on one of the ESPN networks, I would assume. Now, Buffalo wins with defense, and Central Michigan will be welcoming back Lou Nichols for only his second full game this season. He had 28 carries for 92 yards last week, and the beat-up of Northern Illinois, 35-22. He led the country in rushing last year, so he's still kind of working back into the rotation this season. Good running back there. Northern Illinois at Western Michigan isn't going to be as exciting, but Buffalo and Central Michigan should be. And Kent State Bowling Green should be interesting as well. Bowling Green, again, still in the mix for the conference title there. Not as interesting a football team. Kind of one of these that's been getting by on not as efficient play, I should say. They have won 3 straight, though, against Miami of Ohio, Central Michigan, and Western Michigan. And Kent State has a number of skilled offensive players. They did lose to Ball State 27-20 last week, despite a great effort by their stud kind of multi-use weapon there, / running back, and Marquez Cooper, who had 168 yards and a touchdown. They have a great receiver there in Jayshon Polk with 13 catches for 87 yards. So they have some great skilled position players there for Kent State, and that should be an interesting game there as well between Bowling Green and the Flashes there. Thursday brings us a couple 7:30 ESPN games. Tulsa's 3-6. They're heading to Memphis to play the 4-5 Tigers on the ESPN main network. Also, Louisiana's 4-5. They're hosting 5-4 Georgia Southern on ESPNU. Not a lot of high-profile things to say about either of these games, really. Memphis, again, a great quarterback there, and Seth Hangenberg, I believe it is. Kind of the force behind that team with the defensive side suffering and the run game not really coming along, but able to pitch the ball around. Tulsa has been hanging around with a lot of teams on the defensive side and keeping games kind of close on a surprising note, but that's always a feisty squad there. Georgia Southern, of course, the team that knocked off Nebraska and has kept things interesting in the Sun Belt Conference. And Louisiana lost Billy Napier last year and has been struggling to kind of adjust to the life after him there. But that is a game that will be on your television screen. It is worth noting that Georgia Southern's 4th in the country in passing yards, so there'll be a lot of passing in that game as well. So that's something. A lot of air yards should be present on the Thursday slate. Friday, November 11th, we finally get a few games at 8 o'clock. Cincinnati 7-2. They're hosting East Carolina, who's 6-3 on ESPN2. At 9, the USC Trojans are 8-1. They're hosting Colorado, who's 1-8 on FS1. And at 10:30, UNLV is 4-5. They're hosting Fresno State, who's 5-4 on the CBS Sports Network. Now, Cincinnati beat Navy this past Saturday, 20-10. They ended up coming out against the Midshipmen. Ben Bryant was 25 for 35 for 299 and 2 touches, only 55 yards on the ground. McClelland had 11 carries for 60 yards, that's 5.5 yards per pop. Tyler Scott had 10 receptions for 132 yards and 2 touchdowns. The defense didn't apply a ton of pressure to the Midshipmen, but this is just a different ball game when you get them involved. But they did pull out a win there, and this is a team that's one game back from Tulane in the American Conference standings. East Carolina's 2 games back. They were on bye last week. They've won 3 straight games heading into it. A 2-point win over Memphis, a bludgeoning of Central Florida, and a walk-off field goal win at BYU. So they're going to be fired up for this game and looking to knock off the Bearcats on the road here. And Cincinnati, of course, losing at Central Florida a couple weeks back in a tough game that effectively knocked them out of possibly New Year's Six contention and certainly out of the playoff race, although that wasn't really the talk. But that loss number 2, certainly the non-Power 5, is out. Now, Tulane still lurks on the schedule for Cincinnati at the end of the year. For East Carolina, they have Houston and Temple left. So this is like their Super Bowl almost. This is going to be a massive game for them. They still have a number of weapons here. The quarterback here, Holton Alters, 2,600 yards, 70% completion percentage, 18 touchdowns, 5 picks. Keaton Mitchell is averaging 7.1 yards per carry and has 9 touchdowns on the season. The defense isn't too shabby, 21 sacks on the year, and just a good group there. And Cincinnati seems to be coming around despite the loss to Central Florida and the week previous to that, having to hold on to SMU by 2 points and beating Southern Florida by 4 points. I think they're still showing some growth and will be able to certainly hang with East Carolina, but this is going to be a close ball game. I don't have a spread on it at the moment, but this is going to be a fun football game, and East Carolina can certainly hang with Cincinnati here. Now, the other 2 games on the slate aren't quite as appetizing. Now, you will get to see USC all by themselves hanging out at 9 o'clock here on FS1, and, it was certainly a Heisman padding stat moment for Bo Knox this past week to get receiving touchdowns, passing touchdowns, and rushing touchdowns against Colorado to certainly build out his resume this past Saturday. And Caleb Williams will be able to do the same thing against Colorado on Friday. Now, again, they've been out some receivers. They may still be out some receivers. That's not a big deal. They just don't want to give up points on the back end. They want to put Colorado down, put them down early, get Caleb Williams like 6 touchdowns, and get out of there and take some extra time off for the week. So that game you'll be able to view kind of hanging out by itself there on FS1. And then the late game, Florida State's got Jake Haener back, and they are torching them. I don't remember what the final score was of Hawaii here last night, or what the score was when I flipped the Hawaii game on last night. The final score was something unbelievable. It was a lot to a little, and this team that was struggling to get by teams earlier in the season just looks completely different with a potential NFL quarterback there under center. So they'll be playing a UNLV team that looked good to start the season, but is kind of looking like a middling non-Power 5 team at this point. That will be a road game for them. They do play in the new Raiders Stadium, Reliance Stadium there. That's who they share the arena with. But that'll be an interesting one to get a few peeks in. Jake Haener pitching the ball around at 10:30 Friday night on the CBS Sports Network. So there's my new top 20 list. A quick glance at your weekday watch guide, although it's not, particularly exciting at the moment, but there's watching football games is a little bit exciting. I'll try to get some thoughts together on the college basketball that starts this week, although there aren't a lot of big games. So just some things to keep an eye on, and I'll catch you with a full weekend watch guide shortly here. Thanks.
All my blessings, 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 all my blessings.
I need my blessings every penny.